There is a list, kept in the English Exchequer Rolls, a financial document. It records a payment made on August 3rd, 1305. The payment was for services rendered by a man named Sir John Menteith. The amount was land worth £100 per year. The service was handing over someone he'd eaten dinner with the night before. That dinner included wine. The wine was wrong. On August 23rd, 1305, a man was dragged face down through London for nearly 4 miles, naked, bound to a wooden frame, cobblestones against open flesh. His back stopped being skinned somewhere around the first mile. By mile 2, you could see muscle. By mile 3, bone. He arrived at Smithfield with his face broken, his nose shattered, his eyes swollen shut, teeth missing. Then the executioner stepped forward. What followed lasted over an hour. It involved 7 separate tools, 3 changes of blade, and a medical reality that no one in that crowd understood, the reason he stayed conscious through all of it. But here is what no one tells you about this execution. It was illegal, not by modern standards, by the legal standards of 1305. The charge they used to justify it, treason, required one specific condition, an oath of loyalty to the English crown. William Wallace never swore that oath, not once, not ever. Edward I knew this, his lawyers knew this, so they invented something. A secondary charge so flimsy that even the court scribes who recorded it seemed uncomfortable writing it down. That charge, and the reason it still matters, is something I'll get to. But first, you need to understand who Wallace was before London, because the man they killed was not the man they expected. And when the execution was over, when the head was tarred and spiked on London Bridge, when the 4 quarters were sealed in barrels and shipped to 4 different cities, something started happening at those display sites that Edward hadn't planned for. Something that made his intelligence network send urgent reports back to Westminster. People were leaving things in the dark. Welcome to Crimson Historians. 100,000 subscribers. No sponsors, no softened edges. Just history, the way it actually happened. If you're not one of them yet, fix that. Subscribe. Wallace's uncle was a priest at Dunipace. He educated the boy. Latin, French, English, Scots. 4 languages. In an era when most men of his rank could not write their own name, William Wallace could read legal documents, compose correspondence, and argue theology in the language of the Vatican. That matters. Not because it made him a scholar, because it meant that when he stood in Westminster Hall in August 1305 and said 7 words in Latin to his judges, he knew exactly what those words meant, legally, and so did they. Born around 1270, Elderslie, Renfrewshire, his father was Sir Malcolm Wallace, not a peasant, not a lord, a minor landowner, enough property to eat, enough status to matter locally, not enough to matter to anyone in London or Edinburgh. For 27 years, nothing happened. He lived, he worked, he would have died unknown. Just another Scottish landowner's son who disappeared into history's background noise. 2 things changed that. The first was a king, the second was a woman. William Heselrigg was the English sheriff of Lanark, an enforcer. When Wallace refused to submit to English authority, Heselrigg took the one thing Wallace could not replace. Marion Braidfute, Wallace's wife, Heselrigg killed her. The chronicles don't record how. They record what came next. May 1297, middle of the night. Wallace gathered 30 men, not soldiers. Men who'd lost something to the English garrison. Men whose threshold had been crossed. They entered Lanark in darkness, found the sheriff's quarters, broke through the door. Wallace killed Heselrigg personally. Blade work, close range, the kind of violence that leaves a room unrecognizable. Chronicles describe what was left of the sheriff as pieces. Then they turned on the garrison, 240 English soldiers. Barracks set alight, doors barred from outside, men burned alive, others cut down running from the flames. By sunrise, Lanark's English garrison had ceased to exist. Scotland woke up with a new problem. England woke up with something worse, a man with nothing left to lose. To understand why English soldiers were garrisoned across Scotland, You need Edward I, 6 feet 2 inches tall, in an era when most men barely reached 5.5 feet. They called him Longshanks. He'd invaded Scotland, declared himself overlord, and forced every Scottish noble to sign an oath of loyalty, the Ragman Rolls. Hundreds of signatures, hundreds of men who bent the knee because the alternative was losing everything. Then he took the Stone of Destiny, Scotland's coronation stone, and dragged it to Westminster, installed it beneath his throne, so every Scottish lord who came to pay homage would kneel above the symbol of their own sovereignty. Placed directly under the backside of an English king, the Scots started calling their exiled king John Balliol, Tomb Tabard, empty coat, a man wearing a title with nothing inside it. Every major Scottish town had an English garrison, an English sheriff, English tax collectors, English law. Wallace didn't care about thrones, didn't care about the wounded pride of nobles who'd surrendered their signatures to save their estates. He'd cared about one woman, and now she was dead. 4 months after Lanark, September 11th, 1297, Wallace stood on the north bank of the River Forth and watched 10,000 English soldiers begin crossing a narrow wooden bridge. The bridge was barely wide enough for 2 horsemen riding abreast. The English commander, the Earl of Surrey, had not bothered scouting alternate crossing points. He didn't need to. He had heavy cavalry, longbowmen, the most feared professional army in Europe. They'd crushed Wales. They'd ended every rebellion they'd faced. Wallace had 3,000 men, farmers, merchants, men holding weapons they'd picked up because there was nothing else left to hold. He waited. The English crossed, hundreds at a time, slowly, the bridge bottlenecking their advance. Wallace waited until exactly half the army was across. 10,000 men split perfectly in two by a wooden bridge in a river. Then he gave the order. 2 hours later, 5,000 English soldiers were dead. The River Forth ran red for days afterward. Among the dead was Hugh Cressingham, Edward's treasurer in Scotland, a man so hated that after the battle, the Scots skinned his body and made belts from the leather. Wallace reportedly kept a strip of Cressingham's skin as a sword belt ornament. The Scottish nobles, the same ones who'd signed Edward's oaths, who'd bent the knee, named Wallace Guardian of Scotland, a commoner, a minor landowner's son given a title that had only ever gone to earls and lords. For 1 year, William Wallace ruled Scotland. Then Edward came himself, July 22nd, 1298, Falkirk. Edward brought 25,000 men, the full weight of English military power deployed against a single country. Wallace had maybe 7,000, mostly infantry, few cavalry, no longbowmen. English arrows tore through the Scottish formations. Thousands dead in the first hour. Wallace tried to hold, couldn't. Falkirk was a massacre. Wallace's army shattered. But here is the thing about Falkirk that separates Wallace from every other medieval commander who lost a major battle. He didn't surrender, didn't send envoys, didn't negotiate. He disappeared. 7 years, 1298 to 1305. Wallace became smoke. English supply trains moving through the forests south of Stirling would arrive at their destinations lighter than when they'd left. Wagons emptied overnight. Guards found dead at their posts with no alarm raised. Entire convoys vanished into glens that English maps didn't mark. In one recorded incident, an English patrol of 40 men entered the Ettrick Forest tracking Wallace's trail. They followed boot prints, broken branches, cold campfire ash. The trail led deeper, narrower, trees closing overhead. 3 men came back. They reported that the forest itself had attacked them. Arrows from positions they couldn't see, rocks from above. Then silence, then more arrows. The other 37 were never recovered. Edward spent over £100,000 hunting him. In modern currency, somewhere above 80 million. He mobilised armies, built spy networks, offered bounties, imprisoned families of suspected sympathisers. Wallace kept moving. By 1305, Scotland was broken. Most of the nobility had surrendered again, signed new oaths, accepted English rule in exchange for keeping their lands. They'd done the math. Survival beat principle. Wallace never did that math. He was the last one. The last man who refused to call Edward king. And that was the problem, not because he was dangerous militarily. By 1305, his fighting force was negligible. The problem was what he represented. As long as Wallace existed, the surrender of every Scottish noble looked like what it was, a choice to comply. And if one man could choose differently, then every man who hadn't was making a statement about himself. Edward couldn't allow that comparison to exist. He built an intelligence network across Scotland, the way a spider builds a web. Tavern keepers on English payroll, merchants reporting travellers, priests passing information through confessionals, servants listening at doors. The Exchequer Rolls, royal financial records preserved in the National Archives, show payments to informants. Silver exchanged for whispers about Wallace's location, and Edward made the stakes explicit. Anyone caught helping Wallace would die the same way Wallace would die. Your family would lose everything. Your name would be erased. One by one, the circle collapsed. By mid-1305, maybe 10 people in all of Scotland could still be trusted. Maybe fewer. One of those trusted people was Sir John Menteith, Scottish knight, had fought against the English, hosted Wallace at his properties, shared meals with him. The kind of relationship that looks like loyalty until you see the payment records. August 3rd, 1305. Wallace was staying at the home of Ralph Ray in Rob Royston, just outside Glasgow. Menteith knew he'd be there. So did Jack Short, Wallace's own servant. So did two others whose names were never recorded, deliberately obscured by those who survived. They invited Wallace to dinner. Wine was served. Some chronicles suggest it was drugged. Not enough to kill, enough to slow reflexes, make him drowsy. He closed his eyes in what he thought was safety. Among